Good evening. I would like to call the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee meeting of November 6th to order. I'd like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate the council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given. And if assistance is required, please see our clerk, Trish Sarnicki. Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of the town hall. Please note that the Town of Lincoln Committee and council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. I would like to remind everyone of our rules for engagement. Please be respectful while others are speaking, and to please remember to silence all cellular devices. Roll call this evening. We have all of Councillor, with the exception of Councillor Pachariba. We don't have an official regret, so he might be on his way. I'm not sure. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. We have no statutory public meetings on the agenda. And we have no delegations this evening. So we'll move right into the consent agenda. We have come to the consent agenda, which has two items. Item 6.1, the Age-Friendly Citizen Committee minutes of September the 5th. And item 6.2, the Active Transportation Citizen Advisory Committee minutes of September the 19th, 2019. Would any member like to remove any items from the consent agenda to discuss? Seeing none, we will require a mover for the motion to pass items 6.1 and 6.2 on the consent agenda. Thank you, Councillor Rinjema. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. Item number 7, our regular agenda. We are now considering item 7.1, CS 27-19, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Application Submissions. Are there any questions from council? Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good. All right, there we are. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And kudos to the staff for moving as quickly as they had to move on this. Amazing that the announcement comes down as late as it is, and they put a deadline in 2 months later. So good for our staff to be jumping all over this. The only question I would have is, in here, cultural facilities, there is civic squares that are included. I wondered if our Jordan Main Street Civic Square would potentially qualify as a gathering place, a civic square, and if we looked at that for additional monies. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the staff, I'm not sure if that's Director Graham or if it's somebody else.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Given the tight timelines, we looked at projects that we had underway and directly in alignment with our Culture and Rec master plan. We did not actually identify that project. The closing is Monday, and the work to complete it is quite a bit. So I don't know if it's possible, given what might exist from the consultant already on that project, if there is sufficient renderings, business case, costs that could be potentially submitted.
I appreciate that, Director McKay. I'm just thinking that much of that work is probably done with the, where we're at with that project. I would think that there is a fair bit of design that we could come up with, and it would be, and of course, yeah, paperwork is paperwork, but we could probably add that one fairly easily, I would think. Don't need an answer tonight, maybe it's just something to consider and follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Brunei, through to, I believe it's Sarah or whoever wants to answer on that side. This is great. It's very exciting. A lot of monies possibly could be coming for different projects. I think it could be in the report. I'm just curious, does it matter if these are budgeted, planned projects, and do they have to be shovel-ready? I'm just putting that out because maybe it's already noted in the report, but I just need to know that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, they don't have to be shovel-ready because the actual window for the project completion is actually 2027.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I was looking for it in the report, and I just wanted clarity for myself. So, thank you. Thank you, Chair Brunei.
Thank you, Councillor. Mary Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is really quite a demonstration, I think, of the quality and depth of work that our staff are capable of engaging in. Can't even imagine the amount of work that this entails. I have a question that relates back to one line in the Active Transportation Advisory Committee, but I'm just referring to it because it speaks to the hiring of a professional grant writer, which was quite puzzling to me because I know that our staff normally do these things. And then the item that was being referred to is actually on the list. I think it was on the list. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I thought I had this sorted out in my head. Well, anyway, at any rate, we have a list here, and I guess my question is, there was some reference to a specially defined grant writer, so maybe we could have a little clarification on that. But also, is this list in any particular order? And what about the children's education space of the museum? Because we already have the Fry House and the schoolhouse and the grounds. And the Rittenhouse Library expansion, it hasn't gone through any discussion process. It seems a bit premature. There's so many projects already that we have in the lineup that have received quite a lot of consideration as far as their importance, as well as some of the elements that would have to be considered. And also, I would be a little bit worried that Conkle Creek Phase 2 development could even get bumped by something that is on this list. And other councillors may also be concerned about particularly important items. So a little more explanation on all of that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Mayor. Do we have someone that wants to try to tackle a couple of those? Ms. Ain?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Mayor, I'll start, and if I miss anything, please let me know. The first question, I think, was with respect to the minutes from the Active Transportation Committee in September. Shortly after the call for applications was released, the Active Transportation Committee identified approximately 8 projects that they asked staff to investigate applications for. That was in addition to the list that you see in the report this evening. So at the time, there was a motion made by the committee to investigate as well an external grant writer, should that be required to support those applications. So staff did report back at the October Active Transportation meeting that there was really only one project-ready project off of that list of 8, which was the Conkle Creek Phase 2 development of the multi-use trail. So an external grant writer has not been secured. Staff are doing all of the grant writing for these applications to support them. I can't speak to the library submission. I would leave that to our CEO, Julie Andrews, to be able to provide additional comment to that. I'm sure she'd be happy to follow up with you, and I can connect with her tomorrow, Mayor Easton, to have her do so. Additionally, the children's education space is both inside the museum as well as we're looking at an external space on the property.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Zane. And then where does that leave the rest of the list? Are we, is it a matter of the selection being made by the ICIP or whatever the acronym is, by the provincial body, or are we putting qualifiers on it, or how are these going forward?
Good question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor. All of the submissions are individual submissions, so there's no prioritization by the organization submitting them. They're simply treated as independent individual projects. They will, it is our understanding in speaking to our regional representative that they will be vetted first by a provincial panel, and then a recommendation of possible selected projects will go to a federal panel for reviewing and vetting. So we anticipate hearing back in potentially Q2, Q3 next year on whether or not the projects have proceeded. We do understand that they are looking, if you will, holistically at Ontario and where the monies go by region or by area. And we do know that there is already some funding from this program flowing through to the Canada Summer 2021 Games.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. That is very helpful. Mr. Chairman, if I could then, could we ask the CAO what the intention is of the Rittenhouse Library expansion being on here? Because I don't see it fitting in with our normal process of our normal clearinghouse of projects.
Mr. Krukopoulos?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, and I will, I think, defer to Ms. Andrews to get a little bit more information and/or our reps on the library board. But I think Ms. Andrews was looking at the potential of this program and what we could do at the Rittenhouse Library. But you're right; it hasn't gone through the typical, I think, vetting that we would with municipal projects. And seeing as we have that relationship from a facility standpoint, I think before anything goes forward from the perspective of the library, it does require further conversations and further analysis. And so I think to Ms. Zane's comment about having Ms. Andrews provide to all of council a little bit of background as it relates to that project and what it means in terms of the library and the library's strategic plan, I think that's beneficial and timely. But again, I don't know what either councillors Russell and or Pachariva may have some more updated information. I know there's a board meeting on November 19th, and I'm not sure if this topic is on that particular agenda.
I've got Councillor Michalak in the queue, so I'm gonna, I'll let you speak to that once you're up. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Councillor Michalak for pulling out there. Just to respond, again, I think it is important to defer to the CEO, Julie Andrews, for a little more in-depth. I know that we just, when we kind of put this together in our September meeting, it was more or less, we didn't want to miss out on that opportunity for potential provincial funding. So again, we put it through. There's already some discussions, I think they were preliminary as to what could be done with the expansion, but again, I think it was more the opportunity for funding availability and an encroaching deadline that we wanted to make sure that all that paperwork was put in. But I think I would defer to CEO Andrews for some more information.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just finish then, am I bumping anybody out of the way?
You're good.
All right, Mr. Chairman, it's a hard question, but I'm going to ask it because it needs to be asked. We've got a number of projects here, and some of these projects, such as, well, the Prudence Park development is a very high priority. Both Charles Daly and Jordan Lyons parks are in really desperate need of work. They are highly used parks. The playground surface conversion, I believe the plea for that was made by Councillor Pachariva, and it was an appropriate one given the state of neighborhood parks and the amount of use. However, I think we would all agree that we want to maintain libraries, no question about it. We know that Prudence is going to have an impact on the Rittenhouse Library. However, we have not seen any kind of a needs assessment, and so we don't even know what the potentials are. We don't know what the current technology is or the accessibility. We don't have that knowledge as people that aren't experts in libraries. So the normal process and the process that was used when the Fleming Center branch was moved was very comprehensive. I remember that. So I worry about us changing our method. We have always stuck to our guns in terms of the list and only made changes where we could really justify it, where there had been work done. And we haven't really done that. We're not going out looking at shiny objects. And so I'm going to use the money that's come up, because there's so much of it, as a bit of a shiny object. Is that what we want to do? Or are we going to stick with our plan, which is that we make the list, we work it up to the greatest extent that we possibly can, we make our decisions, and that's what we did. This is an outlier, and everybody knows that literacy is extremely important to me. I think it's important to everybody around this table, but the Rittenhouse Library isn't the only library that has needs. Fleming Branch seems to be a bit short on space as well. So where is the needs assessment? And that's all I have to say. But I don't want to jeopardize any of these other projects, because if it comes to that, then I think we're going to be pretty disappointed. Some of these have been on the list for quite a long time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor Easton. Mr. Kirkopoulos?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the comment that I would make to the mayor's point is that we have already reached out just momentarily to Ms. Andrews. We will have a conversation on how these things come forward and find out within the strategic plan and the long-term plan of the library how this does fit in, and is there a plan we're working? And often we say, we have a plan, we need to stick to that plan. I think sometimes when there are programs like this, I think people look at it as an opportunity, and we, from our perspective, always want to submit more, and then, hope by submitting more applications and more projects that we are either successful in one or more. And so I think that's what the library has done. We probably haven't done any analysis of their ask necessarily, but I think we do need to do it, and I think that'll be the follow-up that I do. The other comment I wanted to make is the importance of, once these applications are submitted, the advocacy role that needs to happen between now and the end of the year and into early next year, and that's where we'll be relying on the mayor and members of council on that advocacy piece, because there's absolutely the importance of submitting a very sound and well-done application, and that's critical and important. But then the other piece that is essential is the government relations and the advocacy that comes with applications like this.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Bernay, and sorry I was late, but traffic over the Skyway was not good. But having attended the library meeting in September, it was the lure of the 26-cent dollars that brought forward the project. So as part of this funding, the municipality or applicant puts up 26 cents on the dollar towards the project. There was a figure that Ms. Andrews told us that night, and even with the possible expansion at the Rittenhouse Library, and I'm not sure if it's square footage, but it would take us to 2.6 something, and that still leaves us below the threshold of where we should be for a municipality of our size when it comes to libraries. So it was, okay, this is on the books. We've got a basement there that you need to actually go outside of the building in order to access it. There's a lot of wasted space. So the thought was 26 cents on the dollar. This is kind of out there, and it's been out there in the needs assessment. There's a big pot of money. Why don't we throw it at it? I also reached out to the clerk because I went through my notes. So when we were looking at the Fleming Center, one of the projects, and I reached out to former Chair John Krault, there was a plan for a second story on the Fleming Library. We haven't been able to come up with those plans. So it was about project ready, design ready, and the submission would go in. So that's where the genesis came from, the libraries ask. You know, everyone reached out, it was the same as active transportation. Miss Ain that night said, well, what do you think? And we ran around the table and, you know, it's not prioritizing projects, but trying to get them in there. And then my question, and if it hasn't been asked, because I did bring it up at the budget, so we're going to be doing rubberizing the playground surfaces. Any thoughts of adding those basketball court surfaces to that ask?
Director McKay?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, we could consider adding that to the ask.
Thank you. Councillor Michalak, thank you for your patience.
No problem, Chair Brune. Just some of the questions have been asked and answered a little bit with regards to possibly cluttering the application, but it appears as though it's an application per item that we're searching for, hoping for. And I'm just wondering if, has there been any thought about adding a girls' change room to the Jordan Arena? Has that fallen off the radar? Has there been any discussion about that with regards with the Jordan Minor Hockey, or is that a dead subject?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, it's not a dead subject, but we've certainly come up with interim solutions. The Jordan Lions Minor Hockey Group is going for monies through Craft Hockeyville. They are doing a submission, a community submission of $250,000, an ask, and hope that that would be included along with some other accessibility changes to the arena.
Okay, and if I may, but they have to win that? Is that a competition? Is that so that's not a guarantee. Should we be considering adding that sort of a thing to this application as far as possibility of adding a ladies' or a women's change room?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, to be honest, the Jordan Lions Park site submission is an entire park site submission that would include arena,
It's a
an
blanket.
additional complex, sports field reconfiguration, additional elements. It's a large submission that we're looking for in that project.
Oh, okay, just to clear, yeah, so that's a blanket submission that, all right, thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I think it's important to remember, as Director McKay pointed out, these projects run into 2027, and that this infrastructure program is a $30 billion project, but crosses all federal, provincial, and municipal governments. And I think it's also important, and I'm assuming that we're following up on our conversations that we had, Mr. Krikopoulos, with yourself and myself and Economic Director Deanne when we were in Ottawa, when we met with Senator Harder to talk about Quarry Road and the shoreline protection, and also a big discussion on the Charles Daly Park development. So I'm assuming that we'll run those in symmetry with all these applications. Thank you very much. So we have a motion to receive the information report CS 19 regarding the Town of Lincoln's submissions to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP, Community, Culture, and Recreation Funding Stream, and to authorize the Chief Administrative Officer to sign the ICIP applications for submission. And we will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Timmers, thank you. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. We are now considering item 7.2, PW 33-19, the Corporate Climate Adaptation Plan Milestone 1 update. Are there any questions from council? Mary Stin.
Mr. Chairman, this is very exciting, I think. This is very exciting. And I want to understand better what kind of consultation will happen with members of the community, because I do remember during the election going door to door. In fact, I was quite surprised at the number of people that were interested in a green agenda. This is basically what this is. So, I'm interested in observing how this evolves, but I'd like to know how stakeholders, whatever you want to call them, citizens that have an interest or maybe have a background in this, might come to the table and have some preliminary discussions.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to go to Shannon.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a great question, and there are sort of two phases for the community engagement that we are planning. The first is the creation of a stakeholder advisory group. So the steering committee made up of internal staff will be identifying key stakeholders in the community, such as the Vineland Research Innovation Center, such as the Growers Group, things like that, to consult on the draft plan next summer. The other piece of the community engagement will be with our residents and with local businesses. Right now, we do have a piece of engagement out through our resident survey that's available on the town website, as well as the opportunity to conduct focus groups and more community engagement on the draft plan, again, planned for next summer.
Okay, all right. Now, when we get to page 12, Mr. Chairman, we look at page 12 and we look at page 13. How should we interpret these in terms of the matter of temperature and precipitation? Is this the kind of information that you collect and analyze as a baseline, or does it serve some other purpose in the process? Through you to Shannon.
Through you, Mr. Chair. This data is a projection, so these are estimates of all of the scientific data collection that's been occurring in Canada. Right now, what we plan to do with this information and what is currently best practice in climate adaptation planning is to then identify possible impacts that these projections could have on the town of Lincoln or whatever geographic area you're looking at. So, for example, if we can expect increased temperature, it's not necessarily informative to know, or necessary rather, to know if it's going to be an average of 30 or 31 degrees, but the implications of that increased temperature on infrastructure, on services that the town provides, as well, would be where this information would be used. So right now, the steering committee has access to this data set, and they're working to identify those impacts. So given these types of conditions, this is the impact that it will have on either infrastructure or services or anything else that's within what the town does.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Patriva.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Brunei. And Councillor McPherson brought this up at our first budget meeting, but a question to Ms. Fernandez. Did the working group have any input or look at the 2020 budget as a potential to lower our carbon footprint as a potential to get ahead of the consultation and steering committee to say, okay, we're already ahead of the curve, we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, or are we going to see that on the operational side, or is that something that we'll have to wait until next year?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I guess the one thing to note is that our steering committee that we have and the group that's reviewing the projections and information would be the same people that would be bringing forward the information. So yes, it is kind of top of mind as we're reviewing projects and programs moving forward. And we do try to incorporate and figure out how best to spend our dollars while also taking into consideration adaptation.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Chair Bernay. So having said that, I'd like to see going forward the same way that we identify complete streets and active transportation, whether we use some type of a notation like a green leaf or something. We adapt something that you know what, it becomes top of mind. We see it right away. Okay, this is a change, or this is going to address climate change or climate adaptation. So it becomes apparent to us people that aren't on that committee how we're trying to make a change, how we're trying to make a difference. And then that could probably be a poster board for your consultations with the public, and you know, just keep charting those leaves and keep adding them up, and maybe it forms a tree. Wow.
You
It
have
wasn't
Ms.
marketing.
You have Ms. Fernandez nodding her head, so I think she's in agreement with you.
Excelente.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to likely Ms. Fernandez. One little slight adaptation to the Greenleaf strategy. Maybe we look at our current projects that may have a brown leaf that may be anti or have a negative impact on greenhouse emissions, and then maybe the ones that are green leaf that are positive, and then see the transition. We can go from brown to green. Just an idea off of yours. My other question was, and it was kind of around where the mayor was going, is this data also going to encompass some of the other biospheres that are just beyond Lake? And I'm thinking like water levels with Lake Ontario in particular, because that will really impact some of our long-term strategies around infrastructure, especially around those lakeland properties that maybe can save us money down the road if we make positive or correct decisions now that are strategic, as opposed to rebuild, wash away, rebuild, wash away, that type of thing. So is that kind of data going to be encompassed down the road?
So through you, Mr. Chair, what I can say is that the lakeshore studies that are currently just starting off now have a clear requirement that they have to look at it with a climate change lens. So they have to take into account projections with lake levels. Also, a big impact is from the winds as well, so taking that into consideration. So those aspects are already being considered even as we're going through this adaptation plan development phase. And it will likely be an output in the adaptation plan that is a requirement for projects moving forward.
Okay. So just one quick follow-up. So any idea of when those projections might be available? Is it?
So lake levels through you, Mr. Chair, lake levels are difficult because it is managed through the consortium, but so that's a difficult one. That's an overall global perspective. I think we just need to take into account that we're projecting lake levels to go up, and then take into account the wind portion. So what we've seen aside from what happened within Charles Daly Park, the impacts along our roads and our shoreline, yes, the water's high, but it's the wind that's coming up and pushing those waves up and over. So it's that aspect that we need to be considering a bit more than just the lake level going up, and that's the major detriment to our shoreline right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair Bernay, and it is a very exciting report, and good to see Ms. Fernandez here and presenting it. I think it is one of the key strategies for this term of council to get out and work on this. I won't say get out in front, but to work on this and to work to some actions coming out of this report. So, question, I'm a little confused about the timing of the surveys. In here, you speak to surveys happening at Lincoln Rerouted and Balls Falls Thanksgiving Festival. Did they happen? Okay, so we've already got those. Do you have a number of surveys that are done to date? And second part of that question is, have you got a target number of surveys? Because I just think that sometimes we put such a narrow window on our surveys that, you know, from the time people realize there's a survey out there to the deadline tends to be, oh my God, you know, I've got a week to do this, and then we get a dozen surveys, or we get 20 surveys, and we don't really get what we want to get out of the community. So I wonder if you have number of surveys thus far. We're about halfway through the quarter now, I think, the quarter 4, and we're getting close to it. And then have you got a target number of surveys?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, Niagara Adapts is facilitating these surveys, and they are available online throughout the month of they were available throughout the month of October and will continue into November and December. The target is for each of the municipalities that are participating in Niagara Adapts to reach a respondent rate of 100 responses. At last check, the town of Lincoln was at about 33 responses, which is a third of the way there. The same survey that I took to Balls Falls Thanksgiving Festival, as well as Lincoln Rerouted, and that I am continuing to take to the Fleming Center and other community points, is on an iPad. So it's the exact same survey that's been going out. It's just a different way of reaching people. And as I mentioned earlier, the same survey is available online on the town website, as well as through the social media channels. So it is being made available for quite a bit of time, and I know that Niagara Adapts is keen to make it available for as long as necessary to reach at least the 100 target.
So through you, Mr. Chair, so it sounds like we're obviously a third of the way there. I wonder if, and I was very pleased to see that we are looking at information booths at community centers, libraries, arenas, things like that. A great idea. I wonder about this being in our newsletter and a link put into our newsletters to allow for the survey to be completed. The other thing I've got here is ward email lists, and can we forward a survey to the email lists that we've got or starting to develop in our wards, and also newspaper ads. And I've seen it on social media. I've seen the promotion of a survey, or do the survey through Twitter and through Facebook, but I wonder about newspaper as well. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, so that is something that I have chatted with Carrie Beatty, the communications director, about, so I'll take those ideas back to her as well and follow up with her to see where she's at on that.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Michalak.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just piggybacking a little bit, do we track the data as far as where these respondents live? Somebody residing along the lake would surely have a different opinion regarding climate change as opposed to somebody, say, living where I live, just below the escarpment. So, do we do that at all?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't actually ask for any specific locations other than just if the respondent resides in the town of Lincoln. However, the questions are quite detailed, and there is a lot of opportunity for respondents to write in their own short answer questions. So one of the questions, for example, is, what is your experience with climate change, or what is your experience with extreme weather or flooding? And those are all opportunities for any residents who do have experience with that or concerns with those issues to let us know through the survey. So it's not, demographic data is not collected directly on that point, but the opportunity is there for residents to identify themselves.
And if I may, it's just, in my experience, it's those that seem to be impacted or suffer, that they're the ones that are more eager or willing to fill out those surveys as opposed to those that, you know, just another day. And then if, another question I have through the chair is there any consultation with the IJC, the International, or the International Joint Commission with regards to lake levels and that relevance to the data that we're collecting with regards to lake levels? That's somewhat of a controlled lake level that, are we factoring, are we communicating with this authority in this report, in this study?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Early in the process, in our meetings with Niagara Depths, we did provide a list of agencies that, as we're identifying our vulnerabilities and risks that we would want to communicate with. Obviously, the lake level impacts was one of the things identified. Whether or not we'll be able to successfully talk with them is another aspect, but it has been identified to attempt to talk with them, and we'll try and talk with our local, provincial, and federal agencies as well to try and help us lobby along that side.
And the reason why I ask is just, I just want to make sure that, you know, we're not blaming climate change for improper management of a lake level by a governing body. So that's, I just want to make sure we're not blaming one against the other, and facts are the facts. Thank you.
There being no further discussion, we have, I apologize, Mayor Easton.
No, it's my fault, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make a comment about the lake levels. There is a very extensive historical description of the plan for lake levels that goes back to when the St. Lawrence Seaway was put in. And this is, it's very deliberate what is going on, and it has a downstream impact that is very detrimental to us, but there are major concerns around flooding in places like Montreal. And so I think we need to be just a bit cautious. We may need some education around that information, but I must admit, when I did the digging, I made quite a few notes, and I was really surprised at how entrenched the process was. We belong to, I asked some time ago for the town of Lincoln to become a member of the, I won't get the name right, and possibly the CEO remembers it. I don't know who's getting the information on this, but the mayors of the, whose communities face the Great Lakes attend these meetings on a regular basis. I haven't received any information at all. We should be attending and becoming more familiar with the up-to-date information, but I haven't received anything since we took out that membership. Through you to the CEO, there may be something that Mr. Krikopoulos has to add.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it is the International Joint Commission of the Great Lakes. We are now a member. That happened probably a few months ago, as per a conversation with Mayor Easton. We haven't received any information to date. The only cautionary note I would want to make when we get into conversations around climate change and whatever side of the issue one may fall on, there is a difference between the type of climate concerns we're seeing, the type of storm activity we're seeing, the frequency of the storm activity we're seeing, and what we're talking what we're talking about with respect to Great Lakes and sea levels. And I wouldn't want to merge those two and have a conversation that is the only reason we're seeing issues around our shoreline. The shoreline and the issues around the Great Lakes is absolutely something that's governed by an international body, and I think that is one issue. And another issue around the intensity with which climactic activities are starting to happen, and can our systems handle those climactic activities, are two separate activities. And so I think that education is probably going to be important, but I would just want to make that comment for anybody who may watch this, for members of council, in terms of those two very different issues. And again, they require different strategies, but I thought I would clarify that point as well.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. So there being no further discussion, we now have a motion to receive for information Report PW 33-19, the Corporate Climate Adaptation Plan Milestone 1 Update. And we will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Rinjema, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That is carried. We are now on the confidential items. We have no confidential items to consider this evening. Staff remarks, before I go to see if we have any staff remarks, I just want to thank all 5 staff representatives for being here this evening. It was a short agenda, but we've had some great discussion on our infrastructure program and the climate adaptation, and thank you for all being here this evening. So do we have any staff remarks at this time? Seeing none. Committee remarks. Do we have any committee remarks? I have just a couple of quick ones. Director Graham, for those, we had some quite some discussion when we were at AMO with regards to a large federal grant application that was going in for our shoreline protection. And for those that weren't at AMO, I'm wondering if there's any update. I know at the time we were talking that we were hopeful we were going to hear right after the federal election. It's been 2 or 3 weeks. I'm just wondering if there's, through either Jillian or through Mr. Graham, if there's any update on our application.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no, there isn't at this point in time, but as soon as we hear something, we'll definitely share that with committee. We should expect to hear something soon, but to date, we haven't heard anything.
Okay. And also, Mr. Graham, I'm wondering if you could comment, we spoke earlier this year about 2 MTO NRP safety blitzes, one that took place midsummer and another one that was going to take place in October. I hadn't heard any update. I'm wondering if you could update committee.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to committee, there was another truck safety blitz that was planned for mid to late October, and that didn't occur. I did speak to the staff sergeant, and it occurred in another location in Niagara. So I've requested that, let's schedule another one for Lincoln. And he's supposed to get back to me with some potential dates, because he's going to have to check with the MTO and NRP traffic. But that one hasn't occurred yet. It was planned for October, but it didn't happen. But again, I'm pushing to get another one rescheduled as soon as possible, and I'll let I'll let committee know how that goes. But that's the update on that at the moment.
Thank you, Director Graham. And the last one, and I realize this was a closed session, but I'm just wondering, maybe through to the CAO, if you could bring us up to speed on anything relating that you were have the ability to speak of out of closed session on the Blizzard Road update.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to you, to that particular question around Blizzard Road. And actually, one of the individuals that is subject to that particular issue was in yesterday and highlighted their thanks to council for continuing to support and remain vigilant on this particular issue. It is the subject of kind of a legal toing and froing right now. We are hoping to receive confirmation from the landowner in this particular case, following which we will be in front of council seeking your direction again. So at this particular point in time, there isn't an actual update that I could probably share with you out of camera, but hopefully I can have something that I can share with you in camera in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Krikopoulos. And I'm going to go to Councillor Pachariba.
Thanks, Chair Bourdain. Just a couple items that came up at our ward meeting, and I'm wondering if Director Graham's had any luck. So the first one was with contacting Canada Post and the relocation of the super mailboxes on Stadelbauer. Wondering if we've had any luck with that so far.
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillors, we've reached out to Canada Post to start the conversation. I don't have any other progress yet to share with you, but we're definitely working on it.
Okay, the reach out is good. Second one, and hoping to see this at in the operational budget, because it's come up at at either ward meetings or through our active transportation committee. Speed cushions at the crosswalks at the Fleming Center, Ann Street, and also looking at the reduction of the speed limit on all residential roads in the town to 40, like within subdivisions, because speeding and just the lack of due diligence is running rampant right now. So I know a lot of other municipalities are dropping their speed limit on all residential streets to 40. We were kind of ahead of the curve doing it on roads that had recreation centers, parks, and schools, but wondering if that was highlighted in our transportation master plan.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, the one inquiry regarding the Fleming Center. So we're working very closely with community services, and for the new park design, we are looking at putting speed humps in strategically in the Fleming Center main drive to help slow speed and look at safer pedestrian access across the road to the future parklands. So that's something we are working on and coming up with a plan for. In regards to the speed limit, I mean, we don't have anything specific at this point we're recommending in terms of a blanket of dropping speeds on all the roadways. The approach that we took a few years ago was we wanted to strategically reduce speed limits in those areas where your adjacent land use had some significance, whether it was parks, schools, a high level of community, assets related to community centers, where you have a lot of pedestrians present. So the approach we took was, let's reduce speed in those key areas, because when you do that, and what studies have shown, is that when you lower the speed limit, the driver really needs to believe that it makes sense to be lower, the posted speed limit that is, in these locations. So if you're driving through an area where there's a school, an area where there's a big neighborhood park, etc., to be effective, you want the driver to believe that they should be reducing their speed from 50 to 40, for example. So it is something that we're monitoring. I know a lot of municipalities are looking at, where it makes sense to reduce speed limits. Because if you're going to reduce the speed limit, you want the drivers to still obey it. That doesn't always happen. You can reduce the speed limit and it may not be obeyed. So I guess the answer, an update is, it is a traffic calming measure that we will review when we look at speeding. And that's what the Transportation Master Plan suggested. It's another tool you can use. But at this point in time, we're not recommending, across the municipality, for example. But I think what we are doing and what we want to continue to do is work with other municipalities who are also looking at piloting. There's a few municipalities looking at piloting 30 kilometers an hour in certain neighborhoods, see how that works. So I guess that's what we're doing at the moment. So it's something we're definitely continuing to look at.
Okay, I'd look forward to that, through you, Chair Bernay. I'd look forward to that pilot information because, from campaigning last year and ward meetings and various other interactions with the public, we know that we've dropped it to 40, but in a lot of these interactions, the resident thinks they're, the one comment, well, I've set my speed control at 50, well, the speed limit's 40. So I think a vehicle for promoting this and advertising this drop is the newsletter we have, posting it on the website, doing things like that because, we were ahead with the 40. So I think ultimately it's a 30 at the parks and those places and 40 everywhere else. And again, with respect to the Fleming Center, I wouldn't want to wait until the new park goes in to have those speed cushions because there is a crosswalk connecting Park Avenue and the Fleming Center and King Street and the Fleming Center where there's two crosswalks that cars still come around those corners on two wheels. So hopefully we'll see that in the operational budget.
Thank you, Councillor. Counselor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and since Councillor Patrick brought it up, we also heard at our ward meeting about speeds in the urban area, and, you know, I wonder if we shouldn't direct staff to bring a report basically looking at the urban area and what have we got left for speeds that are over 50, and should we talk about specific areas, or should we talk about a general across Lincoln 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limit for those urban areas? So maybe that's something we can look at. Through you, Mr. Chair.
So are you suggesting a motion, or are you just
I'm
looking for
not sure it's a
direct-
motion. It could be a
direction?
motion, or it could be just direction to come back with a report so we can have a fulsome discussion.
Madam Clerk, you're okay with that direction? Mr. Graham? Thank you. Any other discussion? No further business. I call this meeting adjourned.